You sit at a banquet table in a Cornish hall. The torches burn too hot, wine sloshes from goblets, and laughter masks the fact that two people at this table are already damned. Tristan, the knight, Isolde, the queen. Their story is one of the earliest and most haunting in the tradition of courtly love. A love potion binds them, a cruel trick of fate disguised as romance. Every embrace is both rapture and doom. Every kiss betrays her husband, King Mark. The tale spread like wildfire in the 12th century, written and rewritten in French, German, English. Always the same refrain. Love that cannot be stopped, love that must be secret, love that ends in tragedy. The church read it as a warning. See what happens when passion defies marriage. But readers saw something else. The glory of love that dared to destroy kingdoms. The irony? Marriage in the tale is cold, political, loveless. Love itself is intoxicating, violent, uncontrollable. The poisoned cup becomes a metaphor for the entire culture. Courtly love was never safe. It burned you alive. And as you share into the goblet, you realize you've already swallowed. The knight and the queen, you walk into Camelot, where everything gleams. Knights kneel, banners fly, and yet at the center of it all lies a rotting truth. Guinevere's Arthur's wife, but she is Lancelot's obsession. Their love begins as courtly devotion. He serves her, adores her, suffers for her. But soon, the line between romance and sex dissolves. They meet in chambers, in gardens, in the hush of midnight, and with each kiss, the kingdom cracks. The Arthurian cycle, especially in the Vulgate cycle of the early 13th century, makes the affair the pivot point of Camelot's destruction. Lancelot's betrayal of Arthur isn't just personal, it's cosmic. Love brings war, civil collapse, the death of the Round Table. To medieval audiences, this was both titillation and terror. The story confirmed what priests preached. Lust destroys kingdoms. But it also whispered what knights longed to believe, that love was worth the ruin. The contradictions pile up. Lancelot is both the noblest knight and the greatest sinner. Guinevere is both ideal queen and adulteress. Arthur is both king and cuckold. The romance becomes apocalypse. And when the final battle comes, you can't tell whether the sword is raised by war or by love itself. Fire at the stake. You stand in a crowded square. The air stinks of smoke and sweat. A woman is dragged forward, her dress torn, her hair shorn. She's accused of adultery, of treason, of sins too intimate to be spoken. This isn't legend, it's the brutal reality. Courtly love belonged to the elite, but when desire broke social boundaries, punishment was merciless. Women bore the brunt. Accused of seducing men, of betraying their husbands, of conspiring with the devil himself. In 1314, in Paris, the scandal of the Tour de Nesle exploded. Daughters-in-law of King Philip IV were accused of adultery with knights. The punishment? Their lovers skinned alive, their bodies broken on wheels. The women themselves were imprisoned for life, some in dungeons where the walls grew damp with their screams. The courtly ideal of secret devotion turned suddenly into real death sentences. The fantasy cracked. This is where the Gothic tone becomes history's truth. Love games ended at the stake. Poems might exalt desire, but laws burned it alive. And in that crowd of onlookers, you feel the thrill of spectacle, because punishment was always theater. And the theater always needed blood. The flames rise higher, and you wonder, was it love that killed her, or the men who feared its power? The collapse of illusion, you step into the late Middle Ages, where the castles crumble and the poems turn bitter. By the 14th and 15th centuries, the lofty ideals of courtly love have curdled into parody. Geoffrey Chaucer, in the Canterbury Tales, mocks knights who pretend to pine for noble ladies while pawing at tavern wenches. Satirists laugh at lovesick knights, starving themselves for attention. The ennobling love becomes a joke, a mask for lust. Meanwhile, the Black Death has swept through Europe. Half the population gone. Priests thunder that God is punishing sin. that lust brought the plague. Flagellants marched naked through towns, whipping themselves bloody. In that atmosphere, courtly love looks not noble, but grotesque. Still, the echoes remain. Shakespeare's Juliet still whispers passion that cannot survive the contract of marriage. Petrarch's sonnets still ache for Lavra, a woman he cannot have. The Renaissance inherits the Gothic seed of medieval longing. But the contradiction never resolves. Marriage remains a cage. Love remains a fire. Society tries to separate them. People keep trying to fuse them. And the result is always ruin or legend. You close the manuscript, its pages frayed, its words smudged by centuries of hands, and you realize the illusion never died. It only changed costume. The church tightens the noose. You walk into a 16th century confessional. The booth creaks, wood splintered with claw marks from centuries of whispered sins. A woman kneels, trembling, and murmurs that her heart belongs to a man who is not her husband. The priest's silence is heavier than any sermon. By the late Middle Ages and into early modern Europe, the church had grown even less tolerant of blurred lines between marriage and passion. What troubadours once sang in gardens now reeked of scandal. Confessors pried into the most private details. How often, in what positions, with what thoughts. Sin was no longer just public, it was microscopic. In Spain, the Inquisition interrogated women for fantasies. In France, bishops condemned not only fornication but impure dreams. In England, canon lawyers ruled that even marital sex could be sinful if done with too much delight. Imagine the claustrophobia. Even desire in your own bed became suspicious. Even love inside marriage had to be rationed, controlled, policed. And yet, the human heart didn't stop wandering. Adulterous scandals erupted in courts from Italy to Scotland. Forbidden letters still slipped between servants' hands. Lovers still risked their necks for one forbidden touch. The irony deepens. The more the church sought to silence love, the more love crept in like smoke through a keyhole. You press your ear to the wooden lattice and hear the confessor breathing heavily in the dark. The cage is trapped in too. Ghosts in the garden. The garden at night smells of roses and damp earth. You follow a narrow path to a stone bench where lovers once met centuries ago. Their words are gone, but their echoes cling to the moss. By the Renaissance, courtly ideals didn't vanish, they mutated. Petrarch's sonnets turned longing into literature, turning a real woman named Lavra into a ghostly idol, an eternal flame that never warms. Shakespeare, writing a century later, wrapped the same paradox in tragedy. Juliet marries for love, but marriage and love still cannot coexist without bloodshed. Across Europe, playwrights, poets, and artists redressed the medieval contradiction in new costumes. Love remained exalted, unreachable, dangerous. Marriage remained social glue, a contract, an obligation. The gap between them widened with every generation. Even in the New World, Puritan settlers dragged these ghosts across the Atlantic. They outlawed flirting, punished adultery, branded women with hot irons for slipping into passion. The fantasy of pure love survived in sermons and psalms, but always with a whip hidden behind it. You sit in that garden and realize the stories never left us. They still dictate what we call romance, what we call sin, what we dare whisper in the dark. The roses at your feet drip with dew, or is it blood? You can't tell in the moonlight. The haunting question, the final candle burns low. You walk through a hall of manuscripts, each one whispering its poisoned truth. Tristan and Isolde, Abelard and Heloise, Lancelot and Guinevere, Eleanor and her knights. All of them lived and died in the gap between contract and desire. And here's the twist. We still do. We inherited their contradictions. We still exalt true love in films, songs, novels. We still chain marriage to money, law, obligation. We still act as though love is sacred, but sex is suspicious. The medieval cage never cracked, it just became invisible. Think about it. When people talk about settling down, The phrase carries the same cold logic of medieval alliances. When lovers hide affairs, their secrecy repeats the candlelit trysts of Aquitaine. When we say love should hurt, that passion must be tortured, that romance thrives on obstacles, we are quoting troubadours without realizing it. You extinguish the candle. The room plunges into blackness. For a moment, you hear footsteps behind you, the echo of centuries of lovers who died for the sin of wanting more than their contracts allowed. Their question hangs in the dark. What if the cage was never built by priests or kings? What if we built it ourselves? Because we're too afraid to let love and marriage ever mean the same thing. The silence after the question is unbearable. You open your mouth to answer, but no sound comes out. You stand in a stone corridor where the air tastes of wax smoke and mildew. The torches gutter, throwing shadows that move like living things across the carved saints on the wall. Somewhere beyond the heavy oak door, you hear a muffled laugh, a woman's voice, trembling, hurried, dangerously alive. A man answers, his tone half whisper, half command. This is not her husband. That you already know. You imagine her fingers clutching his sleeve, silk rustling against chainmail. His lips press against hers in the darkness while, just a few feet away, her lawful spouse kneels before the chapel altar, muttering prayers for the salvation of his bloodline. The medieval world loved its hypocrisies. Marriage was a contract inked with land money and the cold ink of family alliances. But love? Love had no place in the marriage bed. Desire belonged in poetry, in songs sung by wandering troubadours, in glances exchanged when no priest was watching. The church made marriage holy. The poets made adultery beautiful. Welcome to the world of courtly love, where you were allowed to dream of passion, but never supposed to consummate it. And yet, behind closed doors, they did. Funny thing about vows, they look unbreakable until night falls. Tonight's secret kiss is only one thread in a vast tapestry that stretched from the courts of Aquitaine to the castles of England, shaping how an entire culture imagines sex, romance, and sin. But the question lingers in this hallway like the smoke. Did they believe the fantasy, or was it only another cage dressed up with roses? The door creaks open, and the scene dissolves. Contracts and carnal realities. You walk into a great hall where a marriage contract is being read aloud. Candles drip wax onto the parchment as names and estates are recorded. The bride looks barely 15. The groom, already balding, doesn't bother glancing at her. This is business. In medieval Europe, marriage was less about hearts and more about hectares. Families bartered daughters like livestock, binding alliances, consolidating land. The church by the 12th century had muscled in, declaring marriage a sacrament. But sacraments don't stop lust. What happened in those marriages? Obligation, mostly. The priest's role was to bless the union. The woman's role was to provide heirs. The man's role was to exercise authority and collect rent. Sex was duty, not delight. And yet outside those stone halls, a new language of desire was blooming. In the courts of southern France, poets sang of unconsummated passion, knights worshipping ladies from afar, suffering in silence, begging for scraps of affection like dogs beneath a banquet table. This wasn't marriage, it was fantasy. The irony is impossible to miss. In the bed, cold duty. In the song, burning lust. Troubadour Guillaume, the 9th of Aquitaine, writing in the early 12th century, didn't mince words. He sang of seduction, longing, sometimes outright indecency. These verses traveled fast, spreading the idea that real love was never safe, never lawful, never inside a marriage chamber, and people ate it up. Knights paraded their devotion, ladies played the game, priests condemned it, and everyone pretended the rules were clear. Bottom line? The contract bound your body, the poem freed your mind. Which one would you choose if your soul rotted in both? The rules of forbidden's love. You sit in a scriptorium. Candles flicker as monks copy words they despise. Andreas Capellanus, court chaplain to Marie de Champagne, has written, The Art of Courtly Love. It lays out the laws of passion with the precision of a criminal code. Rule 1. Marriage is no excuse against true love. Rule 2. Love is always increasing or decreasing. It never stands still. Rule 3. Love can never exist between people who give themselves freely to lust. Translation: if you're married, too bad. If you actually enjoy sex, too bad. If you want to be happy, well, definitely too bad. Courtly love was designed to be torment. You worshipped from afar, you ached, you wrote poetry, you starved for attention. Love was supposed to ennoble, not satisfy. The church loved this because it kept passion harmless mostly. Lust was still sin, but at least these people were suffering for it, rather than enjoying it. But reality seeped in. Eleanor of Aquitaine, Marie de Champagne, and their courts used the rhetoric of romance to assert female power. Women became arbiters of love games, judges of devotion, keepers of desire. It was a paradox. In marriage, women were property. In courtly love, they were queens. A knight would kneel to his lady, swear loyalty, endure humiliation, even fight in tournaments wearing her favor. Marriage made her his possession. Courtly love made him hers. No wonder the priest sweated. And yet, beneath the gilded language, desire still burned. Songs hinted at trysts in gardens, secret meetings under moonlight, kisses stolen in chapels. Did they happen? Of course. Humans have always been bad at obeying rules written in ink. Courtly love set the stage, but real lovers broke it. Every forbidden story leaves a stain in the parchment, a case study in fire and flesh. You follow the story of Abelard and Heloise. Paris, early 12th century. He is a philosopher, brilliant, arrogant, already a celebrity in the Latin world. She is his student, young, fiercely intelligent. Too sharp for the convent walls, her uncle plans for her. Their affair is reckless. At night, Abelard slips into her chamber. Their letters later recall the rawness, how study sessions turned to embraces, how debates dissolved into kisses. They are caught, of course. Her uncle's fury is biblical. She is forced into a convent. Abelard is ambushed by hired men and castrated, a living warning against confusing lust with wisdom. Their love survives on letters, haunting documents that bleed both passion and despair. Heloise confesses she never cared for marriage, only for desire. Abelard begs forgiveness, claiming sin but still longing. This is courtly love without the safety net. It's not poetry, it's punishment. Their story embodies the tension. Passion exalted as noble, but punished as vile. The church wanted love caged. The poets wanted it worshipped. The lovers paid in blood. And their voices still whisper through history that love is too sharp for rules, too strong for contracts, too dangerous to cage. You close Heloise's letter, the parchment trembling in your hands. Outside the abbey window, the candle gutters out, and you realize some fires refuse to die. You kneel in the dim nave of a cathedral, where incense clings like smoke in your throat. A priest raises his voice from the pulpit, not to inspire, but to regulate. Love, he thunders, is dangerous. Lust, he warns, is poison. The medieval church had no patience for ambiguity. From the 12th century onward, theologians like Saint Bernard of Clairvaux waged war on the flesh. Sex was tolerated only inside marriage, and even then, it was tolerated the way one tolerates disease, with caution, disgust, and endless suspicion. Augustine had written centuries earlier that lust was the great scar of the fall, a wound inherited from Adam and Eve. That wound bled into every union. Sex was necessary for reproduction, yes, but pleasure? That was corruption. So rules multiplied. No sex on Sundays. No sex during Lent. No sex while a woman was pregnant. No sex after childbirth until she was purified. No sex in daylight. No sex standing. No sex while thinking of anyone but your spouse. By the time you tally them, half the calendar was a no-sex zone. And yet, outside the cloistered sermons, Troubadours kept singing. Ladies kept listening. Nights kept burning with desire. The stricter the cage, the more thrilling the escape. Because here's the dirty secret. Repression doesn't kill passion. It breeds obsession. And every obsession waits for a crack in the stone to leak through. The Queen of Hearts. You walk into Eleanor of Aquitaine's court at Poitiers. The hall is alive with music, wine, the glitter of jewels under torchlight. Men duel with words, not swords. Women preside as judges, ruling on questions of the heart. Did Eleanor really invent courts of love, where noble ladies decided cases of passion, infidelity, and longing? Historians argue. But the legend fits her perfectly. Married to Louis VII of France, then Henry II of England, Eleanor understood too well that marriage was a shackle. Love, however, could be theater and power. In these imagined courts, women reversed the hierarchy. A knight begs for mercy. A lady decides his fate. They debate whether true love can exist in marriage. Answer, no. They decide whether jealousy strengthens love. Answer, yes. They rule that love must always be secret, painful, ennobling. For a moment, women who were legally powerless became queens of desire. But the game was double-edged. Eleanor herself endured accusations of adultery, whispers of scandal, centuries of slander from chroniclers who could not stand a woman wielding power in her bed in her court. Still, the idea of courtly love spread like wildfire songs, poems, dances, masquerades. Knights paraded their devotion, while priests muttered about damnation. Imagine it. In the same century that priests castrated Abelard, ladies in Aquitaine were rewarding their knights for writing the most heartbreaking poems. Romance as rebellion, passion as performance. But when the curtain falls, the church is still waiting with its whip. Love as disease. You find yourself in a physician's chamber. The air reeks of herbs, vinegar, and something far darker old blood. On the table lies a patient, pale, trembling, eyes glazed with fever. The diagnosis? Lovesickness. Medieval medicine didn't laugh at heartbreak. It pathologized it. Galenic theory held that desire could unbalance the humors, causing wasting, sleeplessness, hallucinations. Doctors prescribed bleeding, purgatives, and sometimes ironically sexual intercourse as a cure. But lovesickness was a disease of the privileged. Knights swooned for ladies they could not touch. Aristocrats wasted away because their fantasies were unfulfilled. Poets compared passion to fever, plague, fire. The language seeped everywhere. To love was to burn, to ache, to starve. Courtly love demanded suffering. The lover who grew fat and happy was no true lover. Even literature turned pathological. In Tristan and Isolde, desire is literally a poison, a love potion that dooms them both. In Lancelot and Guinevere, longing leads to betrayal, war, and death. The lesson? Love is noble, but it kills you. And yet, no one stopped drinking from the cup. Because secretly, everyone preferred the disease to the cure. You glance at the physician's tools, and for a moment you wonder, was the cure for lovesickness ever worse than the wound? Secret resistance. You enter a village tavern, far from the glittering courts. The fire pops, mugs clink, and laughter drowns the priest's sermons. Here, peasants whisper their own rules of desire. Marriage among the lower classes was still contractual, but less rigid than among nobles. Peasant couples often lived together before marriage, sometimes with the whole village's knowledge. Church authorities railed against it, but enforcement was spotty. Love might not be celebrated in poetry, but it carved out its own space in barns, fields, and taverns. Marginalized groups found their own forms of resistance. Women used herbal knowledge to control fertility, undermining the church's obsession with procreation. Men and women mocked authority in bawdy songs, parodies, and carnivals where roles were reversed. Priests lampooned, and lust paraded openly. Even in monasteries, courtly love bled in. Nuns wrote poems to one another. Monks composed love letters under the guise of allegory. The walls were high, but human desire has always been better at climbing than bricks at keeping it down. This was the shadow world of love, half rebellion, half survival. And while kings made laws and priests thundered from pulpits, lovers carved their initials into wood, hid letters in books, passed tokens under cloaks. The official story said love ennobled but did not touch. The lived story said otherwise. And somewhere in the candlelight, another hand reached out in the dark, ready to risk damnation for one stolen touch.